Did you notice that John's story of the disciples' encounter with the reality of resurrection has no Easter hymn in it? Neither do Matthew's or Mark's or Luke's. No hallelujah, not even an alleluia. Peter and the other disciple simply return home. And Mary keeps coming back. So I want to ask you to think about something today. How many times have you participated in a worship service on Easter Sunday? Think about it. If you've grown up in the church and have double-dipped at sunrise or other Easter services over the years, this number could actually be significantly more than your age. How many times have you sung those resurrection hymns, heard the Hallelujah chorus, or some other powerful and familiar Easter music, and said and heard and proclaimed, He is risen, Christ is risen indeed? It doesn't matter if it's been 150 or if this is the first or somewhere in between, because the message is still the same. I have a simple message for you today. A message that someone who couldn't be here today called me yesterday to ask me to proclaim to you. This Easter thing, also known as resurrection, is not just a talisman or a ritual that the church enacts once a year to make us feel a little better for a while. It's not a spiritual shot of double espresso that keeps us going until Pentecost and Christmas roll around again. It's real. It's not only real, it's as real as it gets. It is, in fact, elemental. And if your life is missing this elemental reality, you probably spend a significant portion of your time feeling quite miserable at the core of your being and imagining that most everybody else, especially in the church, with their big, happy Easter smiles, knows or has something that you don't. Not true. Because here is what I'm offering you today. The chance to take a brief but scary peek at the life God has intended for you. A life of risk and a life of impossibility, which makes resurrection a reality that contains both infinitely more possibilities than the realities we have settled for and maybe even constructed for ourselves, and also unbelievably more hope than we can ever imagine. The truth of the matter is that the concept of resurrection and the reality of resurrection should and actually does scare us. If thinking about resurrection and what it really means doesn't scare you, maybe a lot, then I'm not sure you really understand it. That's how powerful it is. I would imagine, though, that every one of us has a number of resurrection scenarios that we would love to experience, that we think about often. And we play the tape of those scenarios over and over in our minds, not just on Sundays, not especially on Sunday mornings, but day after day throughout the course of our lives. For me, these tapes consist mostly of second chances or extended chances with people I have loved. My dad, my brother, my mom, my mother-in-law, and there are also others. I often desperately want to have those people back here with me. And I also look hopefully forward to a time in the future when I'll be with them again. I bet you have some of those too. These scenarios are a part of resurrection, but not nearly all of it. They are a part of the important element of resurrection that has to do with the future. They are also a part that often keeps us looking at the past. And in doing so, they actually train our focus on either end of that continuum of human creation that we call time. Past and future, they keep our focus on. But it is the present, the here and now, that I want you to consider today, and what resurrection has to do with that. Before we proceed any further, I think it is important to acknowledge the frightening nature of resurrection. How it turns everything on its head. If the truth of the physical world is so upside down, how can we survive? Think of all the ways that undeath, not resurrection, but undeath, scares us. Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator Cyborg. Vampires and zombies and ghosts. All of these are simply sci-fi imaginings of resurrection that fall woefully short of grace, but reach far enough into the reality of overcoming death that if we allow ourselves to imagine them to be true, they send chills up our spines. Because if the truth of the physical world is so upside down that the dead don't even stay dead, how are we supposed to live? Death and taxes, right? Those are the only things that we are supposed to count on. Resurrection is too absurd to be true, and yet too good not to. For the past 6 weeks, in our weekly worship and on the bookmarks that we have been given to take home each week, we've had the same prayer that reads in part, "Give us that same fortitude, O Lord, so that we might find ourselves come Easter morning running back from the empty tomb to spread the crazy news of resurrection all over town." Now, I have to tell you, I felt a little odd typing the word crazy in that prayer when it was composed before Lent began. And each week I felt a twinge of discomfort when we prayed it aloud in both worship services and each time I read it during the week, because I grew up in a church that used unquestioned acceptance of the resurrection as the litmus test of faith, as if resurrection was simply something that you had to believe and that you started out believing. And if you didn't, if you couldn't believe it and believe it always, something was wrong with you. Now I am beginning to understand that if you don't have occasions when you think that the message of resurrection is absolutely crazy, you haven't heard it completely. Haven't turned it loose in your life yet. If we aren't disturbed by its message, we either haven't been listening or the preacher has withheld some of the truth of the gospel, and maybe some of both. Resurrection is a reality that requires faith to function not as an object or a noun, but as a verb. We don't start by believing resurrection. We let faith believe it for us. Resurrection isn't so much for believing as it is for experiencing. It's not a thought or the conclusion of an intellectual discussion or even a dogma in the church. It is an experience. And until we have that experience, we cannot understand what it means. The message of resurrection is simply this: death doesn't win. 3 words. Death doesn't win. And that changes everything. Because if death doesn't win, does that mean that violence doesn't win? And if violence doesn't win, does that mean that war doesn't win? And if war doesn't win, does that mean that power doesn't win? If power doesn't win, does that mean that control doesn't win? And if control doesn't win, does that mean that possessions don't win? Yeah, it changes everything. If death doesn't win, then what does? Love. Love that continually flows, sometimes like a gently meandering stream, and other times like a raging river, steadily cutting a new path through even the hardest rock, unstoppable on its journey to the place where God is calling it and us. This is what wins. Love that stays, like Mary in the garden, even through silence and confusion. Love that leaves, like Peter in the garden, returning to what is known for fear of what isn't. Love that, when expressed through the best intentioned human frailty, still often hurts. Love that clings tenaciously not to our human knockoffs in attempting to express it, but to the yet to be fulfilled promise of the only one who gives and expresses love completely. The truth of resurrection is this: Easter is not the culmination of our faith, not a mountain that we must scale and conquer before we become true Christians. It is the continually return to beginning of our faith, an experience that both challenges and allows us to ask difficult questions regarding the other realities by which we are surrounded every day. Easter is the beginning point from which we go forth in courage and humility, not to chastise the world for not believing with us, but rather to confess all of the ways that we have lived, breathed, spoken, and acted as if resurrection either wasn't true or was true and makes no difference in our lives and in our relationships. And it calls us forth to live into a grace that nourishes us despite those daily failings. Because Easter's message is that we, like all of the disciples, daily, even hourly, receive grace and another chance to live as if resurrection does matter, as if it is the only thing that matters. Haven't seen any of the WWJD bracelets lately. I don't know where mine are, but if you're like me, you probably got a few when they were popular. But I think Easter calls us to move beyond just that question. It is more than what would Jesus do, because the resurrection wants to know WDIRM. What difference is resurrection making? Not just what would Jesus do, but what difference is resurrection making in our lives each day, in our relationships, in our conversations, in everything that we do. It's really not so much tenacious faith that Mary exhibits in John's resurrection account. I had to laugh this morning when I got to church and saw the bulletin. Earlier in the week, if you read the P&P, and there was a title for the sermon, and it said Tenacious Faith. Tenacious faith or tenacious presence. And later in the week, before the bulletin was printed, I said, Terry, I need to change the title of the sermon. And she said, what do you want the title to be? And I said, just presence. So that's what we got. Just presence. Yeah. It's not tenacious faith that Mary exhibits. It is a tenacious presence, and just that. Or abject desperation, or maybe a divine blending of the two of those, because isn't that how it happens in our lives? Resurrection is such a powerful and scary gift. Perhaps the only way we can experience, or at least the first way we are able to experience it, is to back out of the tomb, as if we are in pursuit of Medusa, staring intently ahead into the grave at our good memories of the past and looking rear view in the mirror of our shining sword, longing for some distant promise of the future. And then we bump into the resurrected Christ. But we don't recognize him because he looks like that annoying coworker or that incompetent store clerk or that crazy neighbor or that know-it-all friend or that cousin that we'd like not to claim, because he is present in the very people and moments that we're ignoring in our future and past glancing. Mary was not looking for the resurrected Christ in the garden that day. This much is clear. She was looking for the body, the lifeless corpse of the earthly Jesus. But she was looking, and she was grieving, and she was confused, and she was questioning, and she kept coming back. And she stayed. She was searching for what was, for what she remembered and how wonderful those memories made her feel. She was looking toward death as she backed out into life. Isn't that what we all do most of the time? And the resurrected Christ was made present to her in the midst of this. The practice of presence. Just presence. Even when we're looking for all the wrong things, looking backward and forward and everywhere but the here and now, opens to us the gift of God's presence, which is what the true power of resurrection is and what the true power of resurrection does. It changes the possibilities and brings new life to the here and now in ways we can't even imagine. The Easter warning is the same as the Easter promise. Death didn't win. Death won't win. And perhaps most importantly, death isn't winning. Memories of the past and hopes of the future are both animated and woven together in a present that is so full of possibility that it's sometimes frightening. Our calling is to this very present. It is the only place from which past memories and future hope connect in a genuine way. The place where the resurrected Christ so desperately desires to make himself known to us. This is a resurrection's gift, the present. I dare you to open it today and every day. And if you do, nothing will ever be the same.